But I would like to tell you some information before I get to this detailed information about King Charles III and his relationship with the Jewish people and why they would accept him as king. But this is a bit of information from David Reagan from Lamb Lion Ministries, and he says Israel is not a religious country. Israel is a very pagan country with probably 80% or more of the people there being atheists or agnostics. Did you even know that? I did not. They are very secular people, but 15% of the population is Orthodox Jew, what they often refer to as the black hats, the guys you are seeing praying at the Western Wall. These are the Orthodox Jews. The signs among them are overwhelming because they are expecting the Lord to return at any moment. This fact has been largely overlooked by people who talk about the signs of the times. So he says that 80% of Israel are either atheists or agnostics and not religious. And that would further explain why they are Mystery Babylon the Great in the book of Revelation, the Scarlet Harlot, which is actually what God himself called Jerusalem and his own sons and daughters of Zion. He called them that in Lamentations. He said that she used to sit a queen, but now she was a widow and she was sent to Babylon. And we see in the book of Revelation, she is saying, I sit a queen and am no widow. So she's got this idea that she's always going to be protected by God, but God's not going to protect a bunch of people that are rejecting him, atheists and agnostics that do not acknowledge him or his laws. And this is part of the end time scenario in Revelation. So let me show you what the Prince of Wales had in his possession that he wore on his head that now will probably be changed to the royal cipher of the king. King Charles III owns his own personalized kippah, a blue velvet yarmulke adorned with the official royal crest of the Prince of Wales, his previous title, embroidered in gold and white thread. So it's more than likely that he would have this Prince of Wales insignia changed to the King's Royal Cipher. And this is one of his Jewish connections, besides the fact that he was circumcised by a Jewish rabbi when he was an infant, which gives him the sign of the covenant in the flesh based upon what God's law was for the Jewish people. So I talked about the yarmulke in depth in my book, and you might find it extremely interesting because it goes into a lot of things that are stunning. But a yarmulke is worn by Orthodox Jews all the time and other Jews on religious occasions. During a Jewish prayer service, many people will be wearing yarmulkes. The yarmulke signifies great respect for the Jewish faith. And if you see someone wearing a yarmulke on the street, you know they're devoted to the Jewish religion. So here we have what was the former Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, now King Charles III, wearing a yarmulke. But as I wrote in my book, as one rabbi put it, the yarmulke worn on the head of the rabbis is to remind you that there's a God above you. And it's supposed to keep you humble, like it's a type of covering to remind you that God is the all-powerful one, and to keep you mindful of him while you're wearing it. So this is really interesting because there have been a lot of these skull caps that have had embroidery on them of things that were rather pagan. So you don't want to have that on the special covering that's to signify humbling yourself before God and that there's a God above you. You don't want to have any thing pagan stitched on it. But it's interesting to note that yarmulkes are not mentioned in the Bible, and wearing a kippah is not commanded in the Mosaic Law. Yarmulkes weren't mentioned until about 200 years after the time of Jesus. In the Mishnah, the extra-biblical teachings that gave unnecessary specifics on how to follow the law. They didn't become common until the Middle Ages. Kippot obviously aren't required for Christians, but it would be polite to wear one when visiting a synagogue or taking part in a Jewish ceremony. That's what they say. So let me get into some information that will add on to the former information I gave you about King Charles III's involvement with the Islamic mosque and being a patron of the mosque there in London. Plus, participating, going into all these mosques in the Middle East and visiting them and learning Arabic so he could read the Quran. Now, this was written in thejc.com. And the title says, "Why I'm Sure That Charles Will Be a King for the Jews." The Prince's biographer, Catherine Mayer, on how our next monarch could transform Jewry. Princes have visited Israel in a personal capacity, and UK prime ministers have made state visits, but a British monarch has never made an official visit to Israel. Yet, according to the author of a new book on Prince Charles, the future King of England could be the first to do so. Well, he did go there to visit his grandmother's grave, Princess Alice. That was his father's mother. That was Prince Philip's mother. And she was buried on the Mount of Olives. And King Charles III went to visit her when he was still the Prince of Wales. Now, this article was written before Charles became the king. It says his natural interest in religion, passion for interfaith initiatives, and understanding of Middle East policies will make the future King of England and 15 other Commonwealth realms a very good monarch for the Jews. While the Queen has famously never visited Israel, Prince Philip went to a ceremony honoring his mother, and Prince Charles, now King Charles, attended Yitzhak Rabin's funeral. Mayer believes that Prince Charles could be the one to overcome the political complexity and go on an official visit to the Jewish state. And actually, the Jewish people have said, right after he became king, that they want him to come visit them. She says, "I'm sure it's something he would want to do. He has standing in parts of the Muslim world, a close relationship with Saudi Arabia, which means he could do it without causing uproar in the same way. His relationship in the Middle East would make that an easier thing for him to do, not a more difficult thing. It's hardly surprising given that the Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, relationship with the community famously began at birth, when he was circumcised by leading Moel, Rabbi Jacob Snowman, instead of the royal physician. He enthusiastically recounted his close friendship with Lord Sachs, that's Rabbi, whom he met on a plane to Rabbi's funeral at a dinner honoring the former chief rabbi. He was the first royal to attend a chief rabbi's inauguration ceremony, that of Ephraim Mervis, at which he wore a blue velvet kippah with the Prince of Wales' feathers badge, and speaking at a Holocaust Memorial Day event last week, he described the Shoah as a warning to all of us. Now, let me just say that this was by Sandy Rushdie, written February 5th of 2015. So this was way before Queen Elizabeth passed away and he just became king. He will be far more engaged with the subject than it's possible to imagine any previous monarch being. He's deeply devout. Religion is incredibly important to him. Part of his philosophy is that there is a kinship among religions, that they're different expressions of the same truth, the same God, which they aren't, which is why he doesn't feel that they're at odds with each other. Interfaith and faith are hugely important to him. Interfaith and faith. That's really talking about all the pagan religions of the world, included with the faith, which is Christianity. It has been mistaken for a New Age light form of religion. This adds to the fog of misunderstanding around him, the concerns that he's not a serious member of the Church of England, which of course he is. He's been ready for years. He's going to reshape the monarchy. He's not going to be like his mother. He has more opinions and active engagement in the world. He's going to mitigate them to the extent that he doesn't create constitutional crisis. Britain and the 15 other realms are going to get someone who has opinions and whose views are known. Whereas with the Queen, it's quite hard to know what she thinks about anything. Well, she was, she took an oath on the Bible to be defender of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And she did that all through her life, defend Christianity, the Protestant religion. It explains why he feels so vehemently opposed to modernist architecture. He actually wants some of these modern buildings taken down, and whatever kind of green buildings he wants to go up that are climate friendly. It explains why interfaith work comes so naturally to him. It explains why he's so engaged with Judaism and Islam. Now, this article was written in israeltoday.co.il, and it says, Signs of the Times. Rabbi Amar went on to say, all the great rabbis of this generation are saying that the Messiah is about to reveal himself. All the signs the prophets gave, all the signs predicted in the Gemara, the Mishnah, the Midrash, everything is taking place one by one. All we need is to remain strong for a little bit longer. He then urged Jews everywhere to commit themselves to Torah observance, in particular keeping the Sabbath. Orthodox Judaism has long taught that Messiah will only come once all Jews are sanctifying the Sabbath. Well, good luck on that when 80% of them are atheists or agnostics. It is notable how closely Rabbi Amar's exhortation echoes that of Jesus, which says in Luke 12:35-40, stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning, and be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him when he comes and knocks. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Just days after Rabbi Amar made those stunning remarks, Rabbi Avner Efkin expressed a similar view in an interview with the religious Israeli news portal Kikar HaShabbat. Efkin is one of the world's top Kabbalist rabbis. He likewise believes that what has happened here over the past year is most definitely a sign of the coming of Messiah. It would be advisable at this time to study Torah and pray, get ready, wash your clothes, be prepared, because the king is coming. Now, they wanted an earthly king, and that's what they're going to be given, while we are going to get the true king, because we believe in his covenant that he made with the bride, and we have accepted it and partaken of it. And we believe in our hearts in all of his work that he accomplished, dying for our sins, being resurrected on the third day, and then sending the power of his Holy Spirit on his disciples to take and preach the good news all over the world. And here we are today with knowing all of this that happened by the hand of God. Again, it was written in 2020, in November, that the top rabbis were saying Messiah's name will soon be revealed. Rabbi Nir ben Artzi told Israelis that God is ready to reveal the name of the Messiah and urged the people to be in unity and get ready. The rabbi pointed to the disunity in the Israeli government and stressed that this is the appointed time for the people to call out for Messiah and the return of the Sanhedrin, the council of sages that oversaw Jewish life in ancient times. He says, as for the Messiah and the Sanhedrin, the Messiah will come soon to stop the plague, and that was the, pandemic, and the Gentiles around us from harming the land of Israel. And he urged Jews living in the diaspora to return to Israel in preparation for the Messiah's arrival. Then in 2021, they said Messiah is standing at the gate. This is fresh evidence of Israel waiting for the soon return of the Messiah, waiting for him at the gate. The coming of the Messiah is the greatest longing of the people of Israel. There is great faith that this will happen, and that when it happens, redemption will come to the Jewish people and the whole world. They rejected their king. They wanted an earthly king. So the last 7 years, the time of Jacob's trouble, is going to be the reign of the monarch. And I believe now that it's going to be King Charles III, just based on every bit of evidence that's been unveiling before our eyes, that I've been discussing on here, what God's been showing me about it. And I was hoping that he wouldn't be the one. And I've also said, that I thought Mohammed bin Salman could be that person. Even the King of Jordan could be that person. But the evidence is looking like this monarch, King Charles III. And so that's why I believe he will be the last earthly monarch to reign until the second coming of Jesus in the last 7-year Shemitah cycle. On September 9th, 2022, the Sun.co.uk reported, King Charles III's reign may be one of the shortest ever, says royal expert. But history will be kind. Really? Okay, no doubt his reign will be short, maybe one of the shortest ever. As a result, his time on the throne will not be a remarkable one in historical terms. Well, I beg to differ, because if he becomes the world leader under the climate change, the net zero that he wants to attempt, and is already working to cause the farmers in the UK to comply to the 666 carbon, then reducing their carbon footprint down to net zero, then this 7-year reign could seem like an eternity. Now you must remember something. The person who becomes the Antichrist, they are coming on a platform of peace. They're going to look like they're trying to do everything that's good for the environment, good for you, so you should comply to this so we can make this a better world, so things can be better for all of us. So comply to this. I'll put my mark of the royal cipher on everything to make sure you're complying. And even the people will be given the royal cipher mark showing that you're complying with your carbon footprint, going down to net zero, which is the definition of cipher. And the perfume notes are called a cipher that the king is anointed with during the sacred ceremony in the coronation. It also says that he was a shadow king, taking on most of the heavy lifting for the monarchy at home and abroad. His unselfish and unflinching advocacy for world peace, so he's coming on a platform of peace, and global sustainability, so important to him as heir, will continue during his reign, and that tells you everything. King Charles III will not shrink from the big issues of the day. A constitutional monarch means a sovereign who reigns but does not rule. But there is nothing to prevent them from leading. And if Israel accepts him as their Messiah, the anointed one, which is what they're looking for, and he claims to have the descendancy of Solomon and King David, then this is why he would just naturally fit into that role for them. It's not going to be some giant mystery or the beast, is a big monster and all of this type of thing. We got to start looking at it that it's really very quite straightforward how he would just fall into that role as the anointed one and as the one who has the Jewish covenant sign in his flesh. He's a good listener who takes enormous trouble to be on top of global affairs, different cultures and religions. Then it also says he is, if you like, the ultimate chairman of the board. An example of this was his leading role knocking heads together at 2015's UN conference on climate change in Paris. Then there have been his tours of the Middle East and Gulf state regions, and Foreign Office repeatedly asked him to visit. His great understanding of those countries has earned him the respect of leaders there, perhaps more respect than they have for any other member of British royalty. Charles's interventions on climate change, inner city deprivation, architecture, alternative medicine, and organic farming have intentionally strayed into what could be deemed the party political. His critics believe he has sailed too close to the wind, but he has never intervened in a partisan way and has always acted within his constitutional remit. You know how it says that the Antichrist will be a master of intrigue? Well, listen to this sentence. This is what King Charles III said previously. He says, I always thought it was motivating, but I've always been intrigued. If it's meddling to worry about the inner cities as I did 40 years ago, and what was happening or not happening there, the conditions in which people were living, if that's not meddling, I'm very proud of it. So he's always been very intrigued. And the Antichrist will be a master of intrigue. The Queen showed it is perfectly constitutionally legal for the monarch to encourage global cooperation on issues such as climate change with her address to the COP26 summit in Glasgow in 2021. The new king will continue in that vein, but on the environment, Charles's place in history is already assured. For decades, inspired no doubt by his father's thinking, he has been at the vanguard of efforts to make world leaders, and indeed all of us, think more deeply about how we are treating our planet and to realize our lifestyles must change. As he would say, right action cannot happen without right thinking. Charles has continually stressed that all areas are interrelated, and we must see what he often calls the big picture to appreciate the problems that humanity faces. And then we have this that was written by the infamous anti-missionary in Israel. He says, "The children of Israel therefore abide without a king, because the Messiah has not yet come." In fact, the predicament of the people of Judah and the condition of the city of Jerusalem became much worse around the beginning of the 1st century CE than ever had been before. In fact, if Jesus were the Messiah, why isn't Judah saved and Jerusalem dwelling safely? In fact, I can think of no greater proof than, he says, Jesus is not the Messiah from the very passage this guy quoted. He's trying to argue with him. So he's saying that the prophet Jeremiah is speaking of a future eschatological era when the Jewish people will dwell in their holy city in peace and tranquility. Such a golden age has not occurred since the glorious days of King Solomon. Only under these utopian circumstances will our anointed king again occupy the throne of David. This will occur without interruption only in the Messianic age, just as the prophet foretold. He tells this guy he's got a second error is far more puzzling because the very verses from which he quoted demonstrate that Jeremiah is speaking of an end of days prophecy. Prince Charles's estate sets target to be net zero by early 2030s. The Duchy of Cornwall will work with farm tenants to achieve its goal. The Duchy of Cornwall, the Prince of Wales, which is now King Charles III, landed estate, has set out its ambition to reach net zero carbon by early 2030s. The duchy has seen a 76% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions since 1990, and its direct carbon emissions have been net zero since 2006. Heir to the throne, who is now King Charles III, writing in the foreword, said, "This report highlights the significance of emissions arising from land use." He says, "We commit to decisive action to work with tenants and suppliers to move to net zero rapidly, so halting our contribution to the climate crisis. These ideas will be integrated into future agreements, so better than net zero farms will benefit from their leading position," the duchy said. Now, King Charles III issued a warning to the world days before leaders gathered in the UK for the crucial UN climate talks, saying there is a dangerously narrow window to tackle global warming. The one who's now king on the British throne said Saturday that the summit, which started October 31st in Glasgow, showed that after far too long, climate change and biodiversity loss are at least of paramount importance to the world. He said, "We now have a dangerously narrow window of opportunity in which to accelerate a green recovery while laying the foundations for a sustainable future," he said. Saudi Arabia, one of the world's biggest oil producers, says it aims to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2060. China and Russia have set the same net zero date, while the United States and European Union and Britain are aiming for 2050. He also gave 10 actions that we must take to drive the green recovery at the World Economic Forum. This was written by Forward.com. It's saying basically that King Charles III has had many encounters with the Jewish people. The impact of such encounters with individual Jews was likewise evident at a 2019 pre-Hanukkah reception at Buckingham Palace to honor Jewish contribution to British society. In an adroitly penned speech, Charles referred to the administration felt by his great-uncle Mountbatten, first Earl Mountbatten of Burma, for Jack Niesenthal, an English-Jewish Royal Air Force electronics radar expert. Niesenthal helped expose German radar installations along the Channel coast during Operation Jubilee in 1942, an Allied amphibious attack on the German-occupied port of Kippah in northern France. By recognizing and understanding personal stories of Jews, Charles was moved to sponsor projects such as Jewish Community Center in Krakow. This developed from a 2002 visit under the auspices of World Jewish Relief when he saw the remnants of Krakow's once thriving Jewish community. 6 years later, Charles returned to Krakow to open the center funded by his own charities, even noting that he was privileged to fix a mezuzah to the doorpost. Charles has understandably received brickbats for accepting donations to his causes of almost $3 million in cash from the former Prime Minister of Qatar from 2011 to 2015, and further largesse in 2013 from Osama bin Laden's family. Yet it is piquant to think that this money may have partly made possible a Jewish community center in Poland and portraits of Holocaust survivors, unbeknownst to the original Arab donors. At the 2019 Buckingham Palace reception, Charles welcomed the assembled Jewish guest, was so warm-hearted that even the sober-sided historian Simon Sebag Montefiore was conquered. Montefiore gushed to The Guardian that the atmosphere was really electric, and everyone was very touched by the combination of emotion and history and culture, as well as the sentiments in Charles' speech. If you have a monarchy, this is what the monarchy is for. He said, "I have grown up being deeply touched by the fact that British synagogues have, for centuries, remembered my family in your weekly prayers," Charles noted. "And as you remember my family, so we too remember and celebrate you," he added. I see this as the least I can do to try to repay in some small way the immense blessings the Jewish people have brought to this land, and indeed to humanity. In the Hebrew scriptures, which provide so much of the ethical underpinning of our society, we read in the book of Deuteronomy the inspiring exhortation, "Choose life." Perhaps expectedly, not all Charles's encounters when choosing Jewish cultural life have been beneficent. His notorious hatred of modern architecture has inspired repeated attacks on its practitioners. The English architect Richard Rogers, of Jewish origin, was so vehemently targeted by Charles that eventually a committee, including the eminent American Jewish architect Frank Gehry, was moved to defend Rogers and modernism against what they saw as Charles's parochial, hidebound taste. Perhaps worst of all, in 2017, a letter dated November 1986 from Charles was uncovered in a public archive addressed to the author Lorenz Vanderpost. Charles's memoir, the missive recounted official Arab propaganda gleaned during a tour of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar. Among observations shared with Vanderpost was that Arabs see Israel as a U.S. colony, and supposedly the influx of foreign European Jews, especially from Poland, they say, has caused great problems. Charles concludes these reflections with some critics later viewed as anti-Semitic rhetoric. Surely some U.S. president has to have the courage to stand up and take on the Jewish lobby in the U.S. I must be naive, I suppose. In 2020, Charles was named patron of the Jewish Lads and Girls Brigade, a youth organization looking to the future. Last year, Charles visited Merthyr Tydfil Synagogue, a 19th century Welsh construction that his foundation is paying to have transformed into a Welsh Jewish Heritage Center. And this February, he unveiled a statue in Winchester to a 13th century Jewish moneylender named Lucretia, who was murdered in her home, likely by a burglar. Urban legend fans have made much of the report that Charles was circumcised in 1948 at his mother's request by the UK Moel Rabbi Jacob Snowman. Dr. Snowman died in 1959, so despite rumors to the contrary, he could not have performed the same service for the British younger brothers. But, bris or no bris, King Charles III has amply demonstrated that his best moments he can definitely be a mensch. The Times of Israel wrote, King Charles III, a friend to UK Jewry with special and historic ties to Israel. The royal has long had a good relationship with British Jews, outspoken on anti-Semitism, shored up Israel bona fide in recent years with official visit, also empathetic to Palestinians. With the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, the United Kingdom has a new king in Charles III, who at the age of 73 is the oldest person to ascend the British throne. Charles has long had a good relationship with British Jews, and in recent years has also shored up his bona fides with Israel. The royals have a deep historic connection to the Jewish state, with Britain ruling the land between 2019 to 1948. In 2020, then President Reuven Rivlin noted to Charles during a visit to Israel that he and other Israelis of his generation were born as subjects of Charles's grandfather, King George VI. Charles himself has abiding ties to British Jewish leaders and institutions and has shown a keen interest in the stories and lessons of the Holocaust. He has a warm meeting in recent years with 2 Israeli presidents and toured the country in a historic 2020 visit. Charles's grandmother, Princess Alice of Battenberg, is buried at the Church of Mary Magdalene on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. During his trip, Charles visited her gravesite and has done so on private visits. The princess is recognized by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations for helping save a Jewish family in Greece during the Holocaust. Charles said her actions were a source of immense pride and inspiration for him and the royal family. In November 2021, President Isaac Herzog met Charles during an official visit to the UK, and the two discussed climate change, regional threats, and Holocaust education. In a very special gift to the British royal, Herzog announced a nursing scholarship at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem dedicated to Princess Alice that the President's office said pays tribute to her compassion, deep spirituality, and immense perseverance to help those in need. Speaking to world leaders gathered at the 2020 World Holocaust Forum in Jerusalem, Charles warned of the searingly relevant lessons of the Holocaust. While hatred and intolerance still tell new lies, adopt new disguises, and still seek new victims, the world must be fearless in confronting falsehoods and resolute in resisting words and acts of violence, he said. We must tend the earth of our societies so that the seeds of division cannot take root and grow. Charles has in the past warned of the dangers of rising anti-Semitism and other forms of intolerance in the UK. In 2022, Charles commissioned portraits of 7 Holocaust survivors to be displayed at Buckingham Palace for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. In 2019 pre-Hanukkah reception at Buckingham Palace, Charles celebrated, quote, the contribution of our Jewish community to the health, wealth, and happiness of the United Kingdom. Charles was also close to former UK Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. Upon Sacks' death in 2020, Charles mourned him as an irreplaceable loss and a trusted guide, an inspired teacher, and a true and steadfast friend. Charles said, he and I were exact contemporaries, born in the year of the foundation of the State of Israel, and over many years I had come to value his counsel immensely. I shall miss him more than words can say. Defender of all faiths, in 1994, Charles said that when he became king, he could be defender of faiths rather than taking the traditional vow to be defender of the faith, which is defender of the gospel of the Protestant religion. He later clarified his position in a 2015 interview with the BBC, saying, as I tried to describe, I mind about the inclusion of other people's faiths and their freedom to worship in this country. And it's always seemed to me that while at the same time being defender of the faith, you can also be protector of faiths. During his 2020 visit to Israel, Charles also visited the West Bank and met with Palestinian leaders. He said then that he was heartbroken to witness the suffering and hardship endured by the Palestinians. The remarks were described by Britain's Sky News as constituting the biggest show of support that a member of the royal family ever has expressed for Palestinians. Visiting Bethlehem, the town revered by Christians as the birthplace of Jesus, Charles said, it breaks my heart that we should continue to see so much suffering and division. No one arriving in Bethlehem today could miss the signs of continued hardship in the situation you face. Speaking at Casanova, a Franciscan pilgrimage house near the Church of the Nativity, Charles went on, and I can only join you in all communities in your prayers for a just and lasting peace. We must purpose this cause with faith and determination, striving to heal the wounds which have caused such pain. And he added, it's my dearest wish that the future will bring freedom, justice, and equality to all Palestinians, enabling you to thrive and to prosper. Then he went on talking about how he admired all of these Jewish artists and Jewish composers and musicians that have written extensive works of music. And let me just finish with this. As Queen Elizabeth II was laid to rest following 7 decades of public service, the European Jewish Association welcomes the ascendancy of King Charles III to the throne. As Prince of Wales, Charles was a great friend of British Jewry, familiar and respectful of our faith and customs, and above all, deeply supportive of our communities. As King Charles III stewards the UK forwards into a new era, we wish him strength and fortitude. So you can see how easy that it is that these European Jewish Association people have already accepted his ascendancy upon the throne as king. Now, when the coronation comes, and that will be after the oil is placed upon him as his anointing, and he accepts the scepters in his hand and the jeweled sword and the orb, then he will receive the crown, and power and authority is given to the king. And having the lineage of King David and Solomon that he claims to have, sitting on Jacob's pillow stone, the stone of destiny, it's very clear to see by these statements that he's already been accepted as a king by the Jewish people. But when he becomes the anointed one, I believe they're going to see him as a Messiah figure. The Jewish people do not see the Messiah as somebody of a divine nature. They do not think he's God. They think he's just a man. And they are waiting for an earthly king that's going to fill those shoes. And I believe this is going to be the king that they allow to be their anointed one. One last earthly king, and then Jesus, the true king, comes down from heaven in the second coming and reigns and rules forever. You might find that it's interesting that the Jewish Journal stated that the late Rabbi, Lord Sir Jonathan Sacks, used to tell a joke about when he visited Buckingham Palace to receive his knighthood. British protocol dictated that he should bend one knee when the Queen taps each shoulder with a ceremonial sword and says, "Arise, Sir Jonathan." Since Torah protocol forbids bowing before any person, the palace arranged a small stepladder so that the Queen could step up to a slightly higher level and Rabbi Sacks wouldn't have to bow. Just before she climbed the steps, the Queen turned to a senior courtier and asked, "Why is this night different from all other nights?" She's funny. That's what they say during the Passover Seder. The passing of Queen Elizabeth II has made a tremendous impact on a personal and national level and marks a seismic shift for both the people of Great Britain and residents of the British Commonwealth. While nobody expected a 96-year-old woman to live forever, there's no one in Britain who is unaffected by her passing. Postage stamps will change to show King Charles's image, along with paper currency and coinage in several other countries, including Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and elsewhere. Senior barristers known as QCs, or Queen's Counsel, have now become KCs, or King's Counsel. British Jews say a prayer for the monarch on Shabbat mornings, which means that new Siddurim prayer books will be modified along with popular wall plaques that show the Hebrew tribute to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Even while writing this, I have to add to correct myself for typing Prince Charles rather than King Charles and feel emotion welling up every time I speak the latter. We are fortunate in that he is a great friend to the Jewish community. When King Charles spoke at a dinner for Rabbi Sacks in 2013 to recognize his winning of the prestigious Templeton Prize, he noted that they were both born in 1948, which coincided with the birth of the State of Israel. He said, "I realize we have now reached the official age of retirement," said Prince Charles, now King Charles, "but I do hope yours is going to be a bit more realistic than mine." So then, how does a British Jew mourn the passing of their monarch? King Charles has called for the current 10 days or national mourning to be followed by the state funeral, which was extended by 7 days, after which the family would maintain further 7 days of private mourning. It sounds strangely close to Shiva, the 7 days of Jewish mourning, perhaps inspired by Charles's closest friendship with the late Rabbi Sacks. This is really crazy, but it says, and it was the month of Elul when this was written, the lead up to Rosh Hashanah, when the concept of kingship is in force. The rabbis teach that it was in this month when God is more accessible to us, as if the king is walking in the fields among the people. It says that their Kabbalah teaches that Malkut is a quality that does not have any power on its own, but receives power from the other Sephiroth or spiritual energies. King Charles is aware that the British monarchy can only survive with the support of the people, and now is a time to increase contact with the public. Last Friday, despite being in deep mourning, King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla walked among members of the public near Buckingham Palace. The king was almost literally walking in the fields. Oh my gosh. That statement means they're comparing him to God walking in the fields. Wow. Now that the Jewish New Year is here, and with it, they say, is a chance to reflect on how the Jews can live our full potential. This is a moment to take inspiration from an inspiring leader. The Queen is dead. Long live the King. I absolutely am shocked at that statement. The King was almost literally walking in the fields when Charles and Camilla went to look at the flowers left for the Queen. That is supposed to belong to God, and that's supposed to mean that God descends from heaven and is walking in the fields. The king is in the field, and they're attributing it to him. So what do you think? When he becomes anointed, and the anointed one, and he's circumcised under a Jewish rabbi, born in 1948, the very year Israel became a nation, don't you see, with the genealogical line of King David and King Solomon added to that, sitting on Jacob's pillow stone, the stone of destiny, during the coronation, and receiving power and authority with the scepter and the scepter of mercy and the crown and the orb. It's not hard to see how he's going to be the one that's going to receive power and authority as king, and Israel will and already have accepted him as king in Britain. So there you go. I hope I've made a little bit more point of how he's going to be including all faiths, with the Pope creating this situation over in UAE with a church, a synagogue, and a mosque, and that being established as the world religion of Islam, which is basically blasphemy against God and the Messiah, Jesus. So anyway, I hope you see a little bit more is added to the story, and you see how it all falls into place. Thank you so much for your support of my channel. Thank you for appreciating the work I'm doing. It's really wonderful to hear people are interested in reading the testimony about Jesus in the last days and how glorious it is. And if you want to get a copy of the Almond Tree Aaron's Rod, the Messiah King of Israel, it's a massive masterpiece. It's 8.5 by 11, almost 2 inches thick, but it's edited, so it's very exciting. So anyway, olivepresspublisher.com is where you can receive that. And if you want to support me and my work, it's paypal.me/KKROCOCO@yahoo.com. Kimberly K. Ballard, Ballard, P.O. Box 246, Niwot, Niwot, Colorado, CO 80544. Shalom, and I hope this opened your eyes to a little more of how it's all falling into place in an extraordinary, royal way.